Hello, everyone. A very good evening to all of you. I would like to thank all of you for joining back our session. And without any further delay, I would like to move on with our next panel discussion, the topic for which is Agri+Fin+Tech for the last mile. And for the same, I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Mr. Abhay Parikh, Digital Financial Expert, Lead Agriculture, UNCDF. We welcome you. I would also like to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. First up, we have Mr. Mark Khan, Managing Partner, Omnivore. Our next panelist is Mr. Arindam Datta, Executive Director, Rural and Development Banking Advisory, Rabobank, and Mr. Arjun Aluwalia, Co-founder and CEO, Jai Kisan. We welcome all the panelists, and I would now request Mr. Parikh to please take over. Thank you. Yes, we can hear you. I'm not able to see you though, but that's not a problem.
Yes, sorry.
Yes, we can see you now.
Since I think I have anything to quickly jump on next, and then we can move to the panel discussion. So the whole idea about this panel is that we know year 2020 turned up to be a really an year of unprecedented times. We know world economies and trade came to a standstill due to COVID-19 pandemic and resulted lockdowns and movement controls. Among all the economic sectors that were affected, we know agriculture was one of the most affected sectors. The current situation again highlighted the fact that agriculture sector in emerging economies especially is not shock responsive and is not resilient to risks. How
Mr. Parikh, I'm not able to hear you.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Karen.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah. So as I was saying, it's a merit to revisit agriculture as an enterprise. And why are you using the term enterprise for agriculture? If we see this perspective, smallholders as an entrepreneurs are the ones who are investing land, labor, capital, and inputs with the hope of good rains to feed their families and also to sell surplus in the markets. What they lack is the ecosystems that are required. Price. When we say ecosystem, these are market systems, efficient input supply chains, access to credit. And one of the big reasons for not having this ecosystem is asymmetry of information and lack of customized products. Uh, in this context, we believe Agri+Fin+Tech can play a critical role in achieving this vision by serving the last mile. And we know that there are some amazing solutions that are being implemented on the ground that are path breaking. But what is the question is here is of these innovations post COVID-19. And of course, as these solutions are emerging in more mature startup ecosystems like India, there has to be a aspect of them being more inclusive and going not nationally but globally to serve smallholders in those economies where the startup ecosystem is still very nascent. So that those smallholders can also reap the benefits of technology. So these are some of the points that we will be discussing in this session. And taking no more time, I will move to our first panelist, Mr. Arindam Datta. And Arindam, if I may ask on this context, do you think there is a merit in revisiting agriculture as an enterprise with macro vision of increasing smallholder and MSMEs income? Over to you.
Thanks, Abhay. A very pertinent question, and the answer is a big resounding yes. We need to get that done. And I'll also speak a little bit about what the bottlenecks are and what the possible solutions are and what's going on in the Indian market today. So as you rightly mentioned, Abhay, the biggest challenge of Indian agriculture is the fragmentation, especially in the upstream part of the agriculture. where we have approximately 130 million farmers spread across the width and breadth of the country. And as you rightly mentioned, that leads to a lot of information asymmetry. Because of the information asymmetry, we do not have formalization of agriculture, and that leads to suboptimal decisions by the farmers, by the market players, and inefficiencies in the supply chains, which leads to food waste and loss, which is a big, big challenge in India. With the added issues of quality, transparency, etc., we do see a wide level of inefficiencies in the market. And the biggest challenge that market players and the farmers face is that of transaction cost and risk cost, is that to be able to get the right kind of information, they need to spend a lot of resources, and to manage risk, whether it's a large processor, any buyer of commodity or an input player or a farmer, to manage risk also becomes a challenge and expensive. So these are some of the biggest issues facing Indian agriculture. And for formalizing Indian agriculture, it's very, very important to have data. Data or information that is key. Data that is credible, that is reliable, and that is dynamic. It's extremely important to have data which is dynamic because agriculture is seasonal in nature. The nature of agriculture keeps changing season on season. It depends on demand and supply, and there's a huge asymmetry out there. Now, it's only when the different players, especially the smallholder farmers, when they have credible data, that it can lead to optimal decisions. It can lead to possibly resilient businesses, as we have seen during COVID, that access to markets, if they have only one informal channel to sell their produce or to buy the inputs from, and that gets disrupted, then we don't know how to manage our businesses. So it's extremely important to have data points of different kind of channels, different kind of possibilities in the market. And that's why, and that only when we have credible data that is actionable can that lead to inclusive value chains and supply chains. Now, the key here is digitization. That's extremely important to address the issue of information asymmetry and to cut down on transaction costs and risk costs. For all the players, whether it's a bank which is looking for good, credible farmers or agri enterprises to lend to, or it's the input players who are looking to fine-tune their products to the right kind of farmers who are growing a specific crop, or to the buyers to secure their supply chain. It's information that is free, and digitization is key for that. And it's not only digitization of farm record, but also digitization of land and the produce. That is, digitization of the entire crop cycle is important. And the good part today is that there are two trends we are seeing in India. And before I come to the trends, it's a sheer potential of technology which is available today, which was not available 10 years back. The technology today is available. And while the other speakers will speak more about the technology part, but it's the availability of technology and the current movement of organizing farmers physically into farmer producer organizations. So that's also leading to formalization of agriculture and better data points for the market players to work on. And I see a huge synergy between the FPOs and the technology providers, because for the technology providers to be able to digitize hundreds of millions of farmers, it's not going to be easy. But through the FPO channel, I do feel that it's going to be a much easier task. They are complementary in nature. Now, the tech companies, they bring in the best of HR, human resources, and they bring in the best-in-class technology, and they run on private capital. The advantage is they are not dependent on any subsidies or any schemes of the government. If that does also come in, it's an added bonus. But one of the main aim for them is to cut through all the information asymmetry and make information interesting for all the players in the supply chain, including the farmers, so that transactions can happen. And also to address the larger issues of water and climate change. Without digitization, I don't see it happening. So it's positive for India, and COVID has further kind of reinforced a belief that technology is the way forward. And that's the trend we are currently seeing, with the ecosystem being built up, with the investor interest, the incubators, the mentors, the supply chain players getting interested in furthering technology in the Indian market. I'll stop here for the time being, Abhay.
Thanks, Arindam. Thanks a lot for this overarching view, and I think this sets tone rightly to our session, especially the points that you raised about cost of risk, data, and digitization, and having an overarching view around value chain. And also the point that we need to focus on community institutions like FPOs to drive it and make sure that goes down to the last mile. These are very valid points. I think that makes sense as we move forward. And as Arindam, and I now move to you, Mark, and building up on what Arindam talked about. Uh, what do you think could be the technology's role in driving this vision that Arindam just talked about, especially to address some of the critical challenges that have been there in agri value chains and that were one of the reasons why it was not shock responsive, like the wastages in the value chain or the lack of transparency in the value chain? And I have a follow-up question to that also, saying that as we enter into post-COVID era, what do you think are the 2.0 of tech innovations in agri sector that we should watch out for that will address these solutions? Over to you, Mark.
So it's great to be here. As was said, my name is Mark. I'm from Omnivore. We're the most active agri-tech venture investor in India. So broadly, the Indian agricultural ecosystem over the course of the last few years has been migrating from what we would characterize as a system defined by analog and informal channels into a system defined by digital and formal channels. Like that's kind of the big shift that's happening right now, and it's been that way really for about 5 years. It's greatly accelerated over the course of the last 2 years for a variety of reasons. The spread of 4G networks, Reliance Geo driving down the cost of data and making it and really punching deeper into rural India with smartphone penetration. But broadly, there is a shift from the analog and informal to the digital and formal. Now, who is doing that and where are they doing it? One of the biggest things that we've seen is the rise of farmer platforms, right? So these, there are a number of them that are there in India. There are some that are startups, and there are some that are actually backed by corporates, right? So examples of this in our portfolio, we have a company called Dehat that's got about 500,000 farmers on it at this point in Eastern India. And these are farmers that it's a combination of a online and offline model, what some people would call phygital, a term I hate. But you've got about 500,000 farmers, and they link to Dehat through local franchises that are digitally enabled. And those 500,000 farmers are buying inputs, they're selling outputs, they're getting financing, they're getting advisory. And that's not just, the only one. You have in other regions and things we haven't backed, you've got AgroStar, which is primarily in Rajasthan and Gujarat and some extent in Maharashtra. You've got Gramophone in Madhya Pradesh. You have the rise of venture-backed digital platforms. And I think what's important here is they are building the base layer of connection to farmers. So they are organizing the previously unorganized. And I think that's really the story that we're all dealing with right now. Like if I look at sort of agri-tech as a theme, I think there's sort of been 3 waves. I think the first wave was essentially B2B to F, business to farmer. Okay? Because that was the only way. If you look at agri-tech startups that we backed, 8 years ago, okay, you couldn't go direct to farmer. Or if you did, you would by definition be subscale, right? It was impossible to digitally reach farmers. And so going back, if you look at a company like Stellapps, right? Stellapps has about 5 million farmers on their platform, all dairy farmers. But they didn't go reach them farmer by farmer by farmer. They went to a dairy company. They went to a dairy cooperative. They onboarded those farmers. But it was a B2B relationship that then extended to those individual farmers. right? What's the wave that we're in right now? We're in the wave of organizing the unorganized, but directly, right? Dehat is going directly to farmers and wants to be the first platform to get to 1 million farmers, 5 million farmers, 10 million farmers, right? Gramophone's trying to do that in their state. Fresho carts in Rajasthan, Agrostar in the states that they operate in. In specific subsectors, you have things like Aqua Connect that's trying to do it just with aquaculture farmers. And so this is obviously it's not B2B to C, right? Or B2B to F. It's direct to farmer engagement and digitizing them, getting them profiled, being able to then look at extending credit insurance once you have that data. So that build out is underway. And like I said, it's not just startups, right? So for example, UPL, one of the largest agri companies in India, they've created nurture.farm, right? So they're, rather than funding startups or getting involved in startups, they're trying to build it themselves. Mahiko in Maharashtra, the seed company, has partnered with Indigo, one of the largest global agri-tech startups, and they're trying to build their own version of these kinds of farmer platforms. So I think this is the wave that we're in right now. And we're seeing more and more specific either regional plays that are essentially farmer platforms or sectoral plays. And I think what's interesting is and then the biggest one, which obviously is Geo, right? Geo is itself planning to enter this space. They have Geo Kisan. They, have big aspirations here, right? And so I think ultimately what we're looking at is in about 4 or 5 years, probably 50% of the farmers in India will be linked in some way, shape, or form to some kind of digital platform, whether it's a startup platform or whether it's a corporate platform, right? You're going to have a layer of organization and connection that was never there before. And I think what's interesting is people sometimes ask us, okay, well, what are you going to keep investing in 5 years? Because everything is going to be organized. And it's like, that's great for us. Okay, that's great for the agri-tech ecosystem. Product companies were never able to scale because there was no way to reach those farmers. So I think what's interesting is after this base layer is built out, and obviously the government's efforts with AgriStack and the stuff that Arindam is working on will help accelerate this, then you're going to have the ability to bring software products, hardware products, hopefully even innovative life science products to a more organized network of farmers that are hopefully able to then appreciate and benefit from those new technologies. So again, like we went from B2B to F, now we're in this period of B to F, and I think, but largely platform related. And I think probably the next wave is going to be product companies that can then leverage these platforms to reach some scale. Regarding the impact of COVID, I think it's accelerated all of this, right? Like I have been very pleasantly surprised. I was mildly terrified in mid-March about what was going to happen to our portfolio. Almost every company has crossed their Jan-Feb growth levels. They dipped and bounced right back. And I think farmers that previously were, again, using these traditional analog informal channels when the mandis were shut, when traditional agri-inputs channels failed in April, the digital platforms did not fail. And so I think there's actually been an acceleration of movement towards them, and that's continuing. So for agri-tech, COVID is a horrible human tragedy. For agri-tech in India, it's actually accelerated adoption.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for those views. Thanks for summarizing it this well manner. And I think it's really great to understand the waves and B2B, B2F, and now looking forward to product companies that can leverage the platform to reach scale. So that defines how agri-tech is going forward. And moving forward, then Arjun, I will reach out to you as the one who's doing it on the ground, implementing solutions on the ground. How do you think that we in India or in other countries developing technology platforms, at the same time, there are many emerging economies in Asia and Africa who do not have such such mature startup ecosystems. And in a scenario where these people, the smallholders in these economies, need such solutions the most, what role mature ecosystems like that of India or for let's say Indonesia and other countries can play to make sure that this industry reaches globally and does not stay local in its context? Over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Abhay, for that, and thank you for having us here. I'm Arjun from Agri+Fin. We're a financial technology platform that facilitates capital and other financial products from lenders and financial institutions to farmers in the B2B2C manner that Mark mentioned, right? So we are being able to use and leverage those platforms on ground to be able to eventually connect with the farmer, but ensuring that we do it completely in a tech-driven model, not a tech-enabled model, to ensure that the cost of that particular delivery is extremely subsidized to the end customer, namely the farmer. A very interesting question, right? Because India somehow, with respect to agri, is sitting on a very privileged position with respect to the startup ecosystem when compared to other emerging markets, like you mentioned, the other Southeast Asian countries and Africa, etc. as well. And so I would like to actually quote Linda Rottenberg of Edinburgh. And hello, can you hear me? Endeavor. So she made the case that, you know, Silicon Valley's startup culture can be transferred, right, wherever, just on the basis of a few passionate investors, right, much like Mark and all the world-class capital that is kind of coming to India now, okay, passionate entrepreneurs in addition to that, who are willing to pay it forward, right? And here at Agri+Fin, we believe that, you know, India overall has a superior set of entrepreneurs who are extremely passionate about driving change and paying it forward at the same time as well. Separately, you have people like Mark and global investors who kind of now are looking at this space because India is relatively more mature than other emerging markets like Southeast Asian countries and African countries. With better regulations as well, right? So let's take a step back and just think about what kind of a sandbox does India offer for startups to be able to experiment with, right? Because more experimentation will lead to more innovation, that will lead to more scale and diversification across various geographies, etc. as well. So the Indian landscape in itself with respect to agriculture is a very diverse landscape, right? You have different crop types, you have different soil types, you have different weather seasons, you have different geographies altogether. Each state is very different from another state. The type of farmer is very different. The type of technologies they use or the type of equipment they use, the type of inputs they use is extremely diverse, right? That gives startups in India an unparalleled advantage to be able to deal with extremely diverse customer sets, right? And at the same time, diverse businesses as well, right? As Mark mentioned, B2B2S, B2B2C was one of the only ways to be able to do it previously, right? And today, because of the increasing adoption of digitization, right, we are being able, or farmer platforms are being able to go the B2C. Yeah. Number two is the Indian regulatory system, right? And we've seen that pre-COVID, it was largely more towards delivery of finance to rural India, right? We came up with India Stack, we came up with UPI, things like that, which, I mean, completely shook up the way rural India basically transacted with respect to finances. Yeah. Over the past 3 months, we've seen unprecedented amount of changes in the regulatory space for the agri sector itself, which further actually lets entrepreneurs like ourselves experiment more, hence giving use cases to entrepreneurs in Africa, in Southeast Asia, etc. Right? Thirdly, and very importantly, India is very rich with respect to tech talent, right? And what that means is that we have availability of superior tech talent and cheap tech talent at the same time. In addition to that, we have a significant pull now coming in of Indians who are kind of living in the US, living in UK and various other countries, moving back to India to make a change, right? Myself included. Yeah, and in addition to that, we are seeing global pools of human capital also move to India because they understand this as a sandbox to play in and then scale these technologies outside. Much like my co-founder, right, who is originally Filipino but of American citizenship and has moved to India to set up Jai Kisan and then eventually scale us out basically to Philippines and other Southeast Asian markets as well. Right? And finally, is obviously the fact that COVID, in a way, as Mark said, accelerated the entire journey with respect to the agri value chain over the last 3 months. Right, the same farmer or the same business who was hesitant previously in adopting digitization today has very clearly understood that this is the way, this is the only way I can survive and I can run my business, right? So we believe that India is the perfect sandbox to be able to experiment in, and entrepreneurs across Africa and Southeast Asia and other emerging markets as well should very, very closely watch out and try to be able to partner with companies here. At the same time, I believe as startups in India do mature themselves, they will be looking out at scaling in these less mature markets as well, because they would have experimented with extremely diverse customer sets across diverse models as well. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Arjun. Thanks for giving this perspective from a practitioner's view. And this totally makes sense that yes, India gives a diverse set of challenges that all these countries can resonate to. So I think that makes me move to my last question, which is, and I think I'll throw it to all three of you panelists. What are the one or two key prerequisites that could be at the policy level, at the stakeholder levels, industry level, or at customer level that you think are important to drive this vision of agri as an enterprise with good technologies at a more global level beyond just India or one or other mature startup market? How do we make sure Agri+Fin+Tech becomes a global phenomena and it's there for last miles? So I think I'll start with Arindam, then Mark, and then Arjun again. Arindam,
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Abhay. I'll be short. So one is, digital policy with the right kind of safeguards. It's extremely important so that entrepreneurs like Arjun, 6 months or 1 year down the line, they don't get a shock. Right? Everybody should be clear the level playing ground and the policy framework under which they are operating and the consistency of that. That's one. Second is collaboration and partnership. That's SDG 17, extremely important in this space. No single player can do it alone. You need to have collaboration. That's important. And the third one, which is a corollary of my second point, is about building trust. Now, it's extremely important for credible organizations in India to be able to play a role to see that technology service players, the entrepreneurs and the farmers and farmer organizations, that they can work together in a credible way. That communication and that credibility needs to be brought in, and the ecosystem players need to play a big role. And similarly, to answer your question, Abhay, also for Africa or Southeast Asia, it's the independent parties who are credible, whether they are multilateral development sector player, whoever they may be, need to play this role of getting the India story out to Africa and to Southeast Asia with examples and taking our entrepreneurs there with the opportunities to explore.
So I think probably the most critical reform that is still unfulfilled in India and would revolutionize agri-fintech is around the issue of land. So this is, when the government, when the Indian government announced their sort of 3 big reforms, right, in June and then actioned them in July, it was like, okay, essential commodity. I looked at it sort of as 3 things, right? APMC reform, great. It's like 1991 in the agriculture sector. We can finally actually buy and sell in normal ways. Okay, wonderful. Great, long overdue reform, not really debated. Everyone thinks it's pretty much a good thing, unless you're some Greenpeace-backed NGO. Then ECA reform, right, which doesn't really help the startup ecosystem very much, but I think is a long overdue corporate reform. If you look at why the ABCDs of the world, the large agri traders, have pretty middling presence in India, right? No one's really made investment in agricultural infrastructure. This was why, or a big reason why, and that was a great reform then. And then the reform around contract farming, which I think is much more futuristic. Contract farming, nowhere in the world is contract farming huge. Maybe this will work here. It's a start, but it's much more futuristic and uncertain. The other two reforms were very bluntly no-brainers. But the reform that isn't there yet, the reform that we need, is the reform around land, right? We need to have very clear digital records of every farmer in the country, every parcel of land in the country, and the interface between the two, right? That is a must. And the 15% of land that is in dispute needs to be resolved when this digital process comes underway. And that will in turn facilitate the ability of landowners to lease without fear of expropriation. And it will then in turn allow subsidies to flow to the tiller as opposed to the owner, right? That stack, right, is the big reform that we need, that I think will fundamentally change the way that finance of farmers works, right? We will understand very clearly where title is. We'll understand who's actually cultivating that land. And what I would say about other countries, whether it's Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, right, the same reform is required there, right? This knowledge of who is farming what, where, and the difference between ownership and cultivation, this is the level of data that will unlock a huge amount of value for all players and fundamentally change the way finance works.
Arjun, over to you.
Arjun, you're on mute, dude.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. So as Arindam mentioned, with respect to collaboration, right? We've always believed here that competition doesn't even come close to collaboration, right? So it's collaboration over competition any day, right? We work as much as we can with Rabobank. We try to work as much as we can with Mark's portfolio companies as well, to be able to try to get the value prop to the end customer, namely the farmer. And the more you collaborate, the more scale, the more synergies, the lower costs, and the more value proposition you can get to the end customer. Yeah. Number two, land has been a very, very interesting point in India, right? And Mark, as you mentioned, I mean, being able to do that may be slightly far-fetched, but even if we, Agri-Stack is definitely one thing that looks like very, very promising and something that people are actually pushing through and may happen. But even before that, if priority sector lending could just change its lens from looking at lending based on land to lending based on transactions or cash flow based lending, right? That would itself significantly change the way credit is provided to the end customer, namely the farmer. Right. So we at least believe that these two things largely can play a significant role in being able to change the way finance is delivered to the rural farmer.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for all your views. And I think we still have some time, so I'll quickly jump onto two questions and then we can conclude the sessions. One of the questions that I received is, cash is highly prevalent in agri space. What is the scope of digital payments and how it can facilitate better access to financial services for smallholder farmers and everyone in the value chain? So it's open. Anyone wants to? Arjun, would you like to?
Sure, yeah. Mark, as you mentioned, right? So I think it's all the digital platform play, right? As many people we can get onto the digital platform, right? It automatically becomes digital payments, right? We don't disburse money to a farmer in cash, nor do we recollect it in cash, right? It is all happening digitally. Yeah, nor do the B2B2C, the middle B that we work with, which 20 to 30% is these digital platforms. None of their transactions really are happening in cash by them as an entity, right? So they are digitizing these particular cash transactions. The point is we need to be able to bring as many farmers as possible into the digital ecosystem, irrespective of whether they are dealing with a startup or they are dealing with a platform of a large corporate.
Great. I can take another question. Mark, do you want to speak?
Was everything he just said. I can't.
Okay, I'll take another question. It has come from one of the audience saying, one of the main challenges in the agri supply chain is the last mile, the final leg from the distribution center to the customer. How do you think this could be resolved?
I think all three of us spoke about that. It's digitization. Otherwise, the transaction cost is simply too high. Even if you have to sell inputs to the right farmer, finding the right farmer, it's extremely challenging in terms of cost and the risk that the business is taking. In case of financing, it's very tight. So digitization, digital transactions is the only way to make the last mile connectivity efficient and make it more resilient. There's a lot of disturbance. It's digitization, that's all.
Can anyone hear?
I'm getting an echo.
Yeah, no,
just quickly to add on that, as you mentioned, as we spoke about digitization, right? But one very important piece to this entire bit is the agri entrepreneur, the village level entrepreneur, right? And this is the particular individual that we need to educate, empower using that digitization to be able to facilitate the value proposition that these platforms are being able to create to the last mile, to the end farmer. And with COVID, which was obviously a very, very unfortunate thing for the human race altogether, but for Indian rural ecosystem has seen a significant increase in the type and of human capital, right? Which has moved back from cities to these villages, to these rural ecosystems. And these people will end up becoming entrepreneurs. So I think we have this small window to be able to provide them with opportunities, to keep them there, and to be also able to leverage their experiences that they kind of got in these large cities, being entrepreneurs for profit and being able to actually build and create businesses of whatever size or scale that may be, to be able to replicate that in the rural ecosystem, to be able to facilitate that value proposition to the end customer.
Thanks, Arjun. Mark, do you have any views?
Happy to take a different question.
Yeah, Mark. Sorry, I missed your last point.
Sorry, I was saying I'm happy to take. I know we have some other questions, and I was happy to answer another one.
Yeah. So the third question is why there is lack of quick credit to the farmer, which limits them from procuring inputs when actually needed.
I mean, that's not actually true, right? There's very quick credit. It's just very expensive, right? And essentially almost every agri dealer in the country gives credit to their customers. They just charge them an arm and a leg for it. I think what's exciting about right now, you have Agri+Fin+Tech startups like Jai-Kisan that are trying to solve this. You also have a new wave of trade platforms that are coming up in the agri input space, where fintech is going to be embedded in the solutions. We'll be announcing something about that in a couple months. But definitely credit's there. We just have to bring down the cost.
Great. I think we've run out of time. We just have final 1 minute. And this gives me an opportunity to summarize what we just discussed today in last 40 minutes. This was definitely an interesting discussion, and I think it sort of summarizes the point that, yes, there is a need of digitization. There is need of going on an overarching view of value chain. and now we have to organize the unorganized. That's the takeaway that I definitely pull out of this discussion. And I think these are the three key points that sort of summarize what we did. I'll take another 2 minutes, host, to launch something that sort of resonates what we have been discussing. We at UNCDF are working on a global agri-tech challenge that focuses on two main objectives. One is, of course, identifying agri plus fintech solutions that address three key challenges in agri sector. One is lack of improved technology and techniques adoption, poor risk resilience, and inefficient supply chains. But a larger agenda is also to drive South-South exchange between mature startup ecosystems and emerging startup economies across the globe, and to see how this exchange can drive market system development in those economies where startups are still very nascent. We have partnered with FinTech Convergence Council, and we look forward to this platform to industry to support this initiative. We look forward from financial service industry, mobile network operators, and we always welcome your thoughts and support. And with this, may I close the session? Thank you so much, panelists. Arindam, Mark, Arjun, thanks for your time and great inputs for this session. Over to you, host.
Thank you, Mr. Parikh. Thank you to all the panelists for this amazing session and taking out such valuable time and sharing your views. We would now like to take a quick break and we'll be back with our next interesting session. I would request all of you to please visit the exhibition space, which has over 70 exhibitors, and check out their amazing offerings and win some really exciting prizes. Stay tuned and thank you very much.